Hello and welcome to the show. When it comes to supercars, Lamborghini has always firmly stuck towards the rather crazy end of the spectrum. Truth be told, to a non-car person, often these big Lambos don't really make a huge amount of sense, and certainly on paper that is kind of the case. They are rather shouty cars, the sort of vehicle that, if it could, would announce its arrival by going, "Hello, I'm a bright yellow supercar," at every possible opportunity. Not exactly the first word in terms of reliability. There are cheaper and faster options out there, and in terms of even for supercars, it's rather impractical, incredibly difficult to see out of, allegedly quite uncomfortable to drive around normally at normal road speeds, and then really rather terrifying should you go full throttle around a circuit. And we know all of these things about cars, like the Diablo, like the Countach, for example, and yet there is still something. There is something immeasurable that makes you want them. It's something that has always been around with these big Lamborghinis. I love the Diablo, love the Countach. They are truly bonkers cars, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is about them. Truth be told, they won't be for everybody. Certainly not in terms of looks. There'll be those that find them a little bit too ostentatious, perhaps a little too flashy, but that's okay with me, because they could make a car, they could have designed a car that would please everybody, but to do that you end up with a rather generic lump. And I'm glad that they didn't. It often feels like the Lamborghinis of old were built the way Lamborghini wanted them to be, and screw the consequences. And that's the feeling you get with the Diablo, with the Countach. But what about some of the newer ones? Well, today we've got the Lamborghini Centenario. From a look standpoint, I think this car nails it. It is classic Lamborghini craziness. There is certainly a fair bit of Aventador and Hurricane in the styling of this vehicle, but everything is turned up to 11. Not quite turned up to 20, like they did with the Veneno, but yeah, overall, Centenario works. It looks, well, it's a nice aggressive supercar. I've never been a huge fan of all carbon fibre vehicles, but with the yellow accents in this, it somehow works better than almost all of the rest of them. As I said, it's still crazy. You know, we've got a yellow-tipped, humongous rear diffuser on this one. It's still at the really crazy end of the spectrum, but with just a little bit more subtlety than the likes of the Veneno. I quite like the Veneno, but the Veneno often looks like a concept car that somehow accidentally made its way into production. You don't get that with the Centenario. It looks mad, it looks completely different to just about everything else out there, but just about grounded enough in reality to work. Kind of really the perfect combination when it comes to a big Lamborghini. The inside is also quite a nice place to be. Unlike a lot of the, you know, modern Ferraris that want to have a million different buttons on the steering wheel, in this, the steering wheel is, well, just that. There is a kind of center console, I assume some sort of touchpad, and a typical current Lamborghini dashboard, and that's it. It's simple, it's functional, it does what you want an interior to do, and does it all, you know, pretty damn well. So no real complaints in terms of the styling. Still on the little bit difficult to see out of side, but better than some cars. And then we get to the driving. You see, Lamborghinis of old were very quick and, as I said, on the rather terrifying side. Well, these days, Lamborghini is owned by Audi, which means all of these big high-end supercars are all-wheel drive. Now that does tend to make them on the easier side to drive, the safer and quite probably more reliable side to drive, and certainly that is the case with the Centenario. It is based heavily on an Aventador. In fact, the engine is near enough identical to the Aventador SV, and it handles in a fairly similar matter. It is an easy car to throw around despite having 759 horsepower. it's not a terrifying car. You can throw this around a circuit without too much fear. The four-wheel drive will sort you out when you boot it out of a corner and will give you plenty of grip through the turn. It does understeer a little bit, much like any very high-powered all-wheel drive car will. It does get some understeer. It's not terrible in this, but it is certainly noticeable. On the subject of the engine, yeah, we do have a slight power increase from the Aventador SV. Not a huge amount, though. It's only 19 horsepower more. Still exactly the same amount of torque, and the cars weigh near enough identical at 3,800 pounds. They are not light cars, but statistic-wise, still pretty damn impressive. 0 to 60, about 2.5 seconds. We'll be doing 100 in under 6. Top speed, over 230 miles an hour. Yep, they are the impressive facts and figures that you would expect from an impressive supercar such as this. In some ways, it might lack a little bit of that character. In some ways, by making it all-wheel drive, by making it all kind of quite accessible, it loses some of the character that you got with cars like the Diablo, that you got with cars like the Countach. However, of course, we do have to take the Centenario around our Yas Marina test track. There is plenty of fire from the back of it as we set off the line. Of course, being all-wheel drive, it is going to have that advantage in terms of the launch. The brakes are pretty damn good as well at getting this car stopped, because it is going to accelerate very, very quickly indeed. And despite being relatively heavy, as a relatively heavy in the grand scheme of things, when we've had a fair few kind of lightened track cars and so on go around here, yeah, 3,800 pounds is not exactly lightweight. This doesn't do too bad a job in terms of changing directions. We don't get any big oversteer through the two fast right-handers. Certainly not going to be going flat out through there, though. This car far too fast to possibly comprehend that. Certainly doesn't have enough grip. For these next couple of corners, you've got to be a bit patient with the Centenario. You get on the power too soon, you are just going to understeer straight off into the wall. But if you can wait long enough, there is plenty of acceleration. And of course, none of the time is wasted around here. While these aren't really low-speed corners, still the big rear-wheel drive hypercars and so on are going to spin their wheels out of them if you aren't careful, and that's not a concern you ever have with the Centenario. Once you've got that power down, all 700 horsepower is going to be unleashed immediately and in plenty of control. So, yeah, that traction does come in handy. Its lap time is quite an interesting one. It'll go into 4th place. It does just, and only just, beat the ACR Viper. Both of them on a 1 minute 6.2. Truth be told, the Centenario is making up more time than that just off the launch. If it came to a corner, the Viper is going to wipe the floor with the Lamborghini. But that all-wheel drive launch and some of that all-wheel drive traction as well can make up the lost time through the corners. Still, the Centenario, not too bad through those turns, not too bad whatsoever. Still a little bit down on the ultimate hypercars, though, the likes of the Lycan Hypersport and the Zenvo, etc. There, I think just sheer brute power is enough to keep them ahead of the likes of the Centenario. So, yeah, it's a good lap time from this vehicle, and truth be told, when you go and take it around a wet Nürburgring, even, one of those challenging tracks you will come across, Centenario really isn't that difficult to drive. You take the Countach, the Diablo, and try and race them around here, and that's a scary experience. In the Centenario, despite it being a much more powerful car, a much quicker car, that is not the case whatsoever. On paper, theoretically, this car has the best of both worlds. It has that fantastic Italian styling, that little bit of Lamborghini craziness without quite going all the way to the Veneno levels, and you've got the German engineering that underpins it all, the Audi all-wheel drive system, hopefully, theoretically, the reliability, and in general the car is that bit easier to manage. So on paper there might almost be a shred of sense with the Centenario. That is until you look at the price. While Forza 7 will mess around a little bit with car valuations, truth be told, this vehicle is about £1.7 million. That is an awful £1 million and a bit more pounds more than the Aventador SV. A car which, while yes, this does look slightly better, I think, it's only a tiny bit faster, only 19 more horsepower. And that puts it dangerously close in terms of money to the Sesto Elemento. And this is where the problem comes in for the Centenario. As I said at the start, a Lamborghini doesn't necessarily have to make sense on paper. Of course not. That's not why we like these cars. There is a certain magic to some of them cars, like the Diablo cars, like the Countach, have it. While the Centenario looks the part, it doesn't quite drive the part. I've thought long and hard about the best words to describe it. Safe isn't the right one. While yes, these are easier to drive than the other cars, they're still very quick. They're still very quick indeed. You can still have a massive accident. The best word I could come up with was uninvolving. The Centenario, the Aventador SV both suffer from a similar problem of just not quite being involving enough to drive in comparison to some of the earlier Lamborghinis and in comparison to the Sesto Elemento. As I said, for a similar amount of money, you could have this monster. It weighs just 2,200 pounds, that is over 1,500 less than the Centenario, which weighs about the same as the Aventador SV, and it has 571 horsepower. That might not be as much as the Centenario, but when you put that in a car this light, it is dramatic. Dramatic to say the least. And this has that involving feel. It has the crazy looks, the noise to go with it all. It's not even road legal. It's bonkers. It's the kind of absurdo Lamborghini, although admittedly I would still argue the Centenario is perhaps the better looking of the two. So could we say then that maybe while the Sesto would be where the car you would want, the ideal car, could the Centenario be the ultimate in terms of poster cars for Lamborghini? Well, in terms of their modern cars, I would say yes, but overall, not a chance. It would still have to compete with the likes of the Miura, and as much as I do like the styling of the Centenario, I'm afraid it's always going to lose this battle.